no wizard, and we're taking on talking about anarchy, right? So I I was recording this. I was streaming just now, but then I realized that my headphones were not on, so I was just talking, you know, and my mic was not even attached. So very sorry about that. Probably gonna delete that, so you'll never see it if you're late to the stream. Um, but let me update this on my channel as well so that people aren't getting the wrong link. Um, here we go. All right, let me get that there. Boom, bam. But yeah, what I was saying before all this is that the last section we talked about um, education, right, in an anarchic society, and in this section we're discussing technology. What does technology look like in an anarchic society? And super excited about this because one thing that we are often kind of ignoring with our current technology, even technology that is not abusive, right? At least directly, is the fact that a lot of our technology depends on exploitation of resources and people. Meaning that even this computer, which is awesome, is an amazing fact that we have this, is that many of these minerals and resources, the metals that go into the building the chips and all this other stuff comes from blood mines or from other types of mining facilities that have either killed or abused or otherwise exploited the peoples there, right? And it pollutes their land, and we take all of these resources and funnel it back here to America, to any of these other places, and we kind of just ignore that, right? And so we claim that we've done a good thing with our technology. And even though it's amazing I can talk to you in this video and things like that, it's not sustainable, right? And it's highly unethical, right? When people look back at this in 100 years or something like that, it's going to be akin to when people look back at like the wealth accomplished through slavery. Even though today we ignore the fact that pretty much entirety of America would not have happened without slavery. Like we kind of just put that to the side, right? Like the entire wealth of America would not have happened. It wasn't because of capitalism, right? Or rather, the good that we've gotten from it still does not erase the bad, right? And this is an unfortunate reality that a lot of these capitalistic gains of technology and progress, and so quote unquote progress and things like that, comes with exploitation and serious ethical problems, right? And we can kind of ignore this or even poo-poo this idea, but it's still the facts. So yeah, I'm super curious of what they're going to cover and what they're going to talk about, what he's going to talk about in this section. So let's get into it. It says, what about technology? Many people worry that the complexity of modern day technology and the high level integration of infrastructure and production in present day society makes anarchy a dream of the past. Yeah, right. In fact, this worry is not at all unfounded. It is not so much the complexity of the technology, however, that is out, I guess, that is at odds with the creation of an anarchist society, so much as the fact that technology is not a neutral thing. Exactly. Right. We like to think that, oh yeah, it's just good stuff. It's just, for human development, but nope. As Uri Gordon expertly summed it up, the development of technology reflects the interests and needs of ruling members of society. Exactly. And technology reshapes the physical world in a way that reinforces authority and discourages rebellion. Ooh, yeah. I'm super interested in what he said there in these sources. Anarchy alive, interference policies, from the practice to theory. I have to check that out because I've been talking about. I'm on this section with my newsletter as well. Technology is not neutral. The Luddites had a point. um, it is no coincidence. Yeah, it is no coincidence that the nuclear arms and energy infrastructure creates a need for a centrally organized, high security military organization and disaster management agencies with emergency powers and ability to suspend constitutional rights. Ain't that something? That interstate highways allow the rapid domestic deployment of the military. Yep, yep. That's exactly why highways were built. Why most roadways were built was for the central government to easily be able to extract taxes and send their military around. And that goes back hundreds of years, even before the founding of America. Encourage the transcontinental The interstate highways allow the rapid development, deployment of military, encourage the transcontinental shipping of goods and private transportation via personal automobiles. That factories demand unskilled, replaceable laborers who couldn't possibly hold the job until retirement, assuming the boss even wanted to give retirement benefits. Because within a few years, occupational injuries from repetitive tasks or the unsafe pace of the production line will render them unable to continue. The subsidies and infrastructure provided by government tend to go towards inventions that increase state power, often to everyone else's misfortune. Jet fighters, surveillance systems, pyramid building, etc. Yeah, that's a huge thing right there. Even the most benevolent forms of government support for invention, such as government subsidies to medical research, at best go to inventing treatments that are patented by corporations with no scruples about letting people die if they cannot afford them. Exactly, right? Just as they have no scruples over torturing and killing thousands of animals in the testing phase. Oof, ain't that something? And it's funny, well, not even funny, but it's kind of unfortunate. But people will say, "Oh, it's necessary," right? Like, how else will we test this medication and all this other stuff that we love so much, that we benefit so much from? Well, that is the problem, right? Like, how we claim ourselves to be so ethical and high-minded and things like that, but the reality is like whatever is convenient, right? Whatever we kind of can just you know push aside, serious ethical considerations for a perceived advancement in our technology and things like that. And what makes this even worse is that a lot of this testing is not even that efficient, right? Like things that work or does not work on animals, on other animals rather, does not necessarily, act the same for humans. Which is why we have human trials and testing and all this other stuff. Um, Furthermore, if we really cared about, being efficient with this stuff rather than just being cheap, we would figure out how to grow cultured cells or human cells or things like that and test it that way, right? And furthermore, a lot of these medicines still have a huge amount of side effects, anyways, right? Um, and again, people like to say, "Oh, this stuff is expensive to do, therefore, of course, they need to, you know, they need to." Patent it and make a return on investment for the medical research and stuff like that. But again, you have to ask, why is it so expensive? You know, why don't we have a community setting where people don't even have to worry about their everyday life, right? Like we can. Let me not get into all that because I've talked about it plenty enough, and I'm sure they're going to talk about it. If not here, at least later on. But yeah, you have to ask these questions like, why is it even so expensive, and um, why is it that a lot of these investments for medical science and things like don't really pan out to be like purely for the benefit of people, right? A lot of times medical advancements in medical research, right, they often greenlight specifically ones that would be more, once again, profitable because of that return on investment. You have to look at the incentives. Or do they care more about helping people to solve and cure problems, I mean cure sickness and disease and stuff like that completely, or do they care more about how can we make effective medicines, but not too effective, like effective medicines that keep bringing people using these medicines in the first place. It just makes business sense to make medicines that are um, kind of piecemeal, if you will. The demands of freedom confront us with a much heavier choice than simply changing our decision making structures. We will have to physically disassemble much of the world we live in and build it anew. Freedom, as well as the ecological balance of the planet and thus our very survival, is incompatible with nuclear energy. Reliance on fossil fuels such as oil and coal, and a car culture which estranges public space and fosters a system of exchange where most goods are not produced locally. Now, I'm not sure what his problem is with nuclear energy because there's been a lot of research that shows it's way better than pretty much any other type of energy source that we can have, right? Maybe it's the mining of things because that can be, a serious problem. Um, but if I remember correctly, there's ways to create the material for nuclear energy that that doesn't require any sort of like what do you call it, fracking or like mining and things like that. Um, Granted, you do have this nuclear waste problem, but we also can figure out ways to, dispose of that waste without like disposing it in the environment. You can lock it away in a centralized facility or something like that. So I don't know about this nuclear energy part. I would love to see, any sort of sources as to what the problems therein are. But yeah, definitely these other things definitely. This transformation will require a great deal of inventiveness. Thus, the relevant question becomes: will an anarchist social movement and society be inventive enough to carry out this transformation? I think the answer is yes. I do. I do too. After all, the most useful tools in human history were invented before government and capitalism came about. Exactly. Right? Like the wheel, writing, um, fire, a lot of our utensils and things like that. Um, Even glitter, right, coming from China and things like that. Before they had a kind of centralized government, it was made for like what firecrackers and celebrations before it was weaponized. So a lot of our technologies have been like incremental advancements. And don't get me wrong, it's amazing. It is amazing. But the fact is that even like with today, modern technology, like the internet, like a lot of it was created not because of government use. Yes, with some of parts of ARPANET, they wanted to, you know, use it for war purposes, but most of it was created to facilitate knowledge sharing between universities, right? They want to make it easier uh, to share knowledge between these different institutions and things like that. So, a lot of these kind of technologies that we enjoy the most today, even to this day, are technologies that were built outside of or despite capitalistic tendencies. And I think that's a very important point to remember. We like to say, oh, it's because capitalism we have all this, but it's really because capitalism that many of the best technologies, like the internet, has been ham-fisted and kind of handicapped and destroyed, right? So that it can be profitable. So think about that. Capitalism's so-called free market is said to motivate innovation, and market competition does contribute to the proliferation of profitable inventions, which are not necessarily helpful inventions. Exactly. Capitalist competition dictates that every few years, all the old gadgets become obsolete as new ones are invented. So people have to throw the old ones away and buy new ones at great detriment to the environment. Because of this planned obsolescence, a few inventions tend to be well made or fully thought out in the first place, since they're destined for the trash from the beginning. And I know many people. Oh my gosh, I've heard this before. Like, oh, don't you like the new iPhone or the new smartphone or whatever? Like, it's way better than what we had before with these little flip phones or the pagers and things like that. Don't get me wrong. As a person who grew up, in this day and age of going from no phones to this freaking smartphone being able to do anything on this thing, you have to recognize that most people don't even like can't even make the most of these technologies. Like most people complain about their smartphones all the time, and people say, "Oh, they're just privileged," right? But even people who are new to it, like the older generation, when they first get their phone, right, they just can't understand how to use it and things like that. It's not because they're not as smart or whatever. It's because a lot of it is not designed well. As a UX designer, I'm starting to see that a lot of these softwares, a lot of these technologies are not designed well in the first place, right? They're not designed to be made to be actually user friendly. They're designed to be marketable, to prey upon your brain, your little things like the hook and the bright colors and sounds and things like that. They're designed to be addictive. Like we know this. We have the receipts. So the idea that a lot of our technology is it's like the idea that innovation is beneficial because it's fast and disruptive. We know that to be wrong. Like many people do not like the new smartphones and this, that, and the other. It's not that much of a difference, and yet you have to pay more for it. you don't really have as much of an advantage for it, and we don't even bring into the calculation of these innovations again the environmental damage is doing, right? Centric Taste, welcome again. A Centric Cast. Gosh, I don't know why I always get your name wrong. Says the proliferation of inventions. There we go. Is kind of bad to this due to the second law of thermodynamics. Ooh, I'd love to know what you mean by that. Second law of thermodynamics. Was that the um we'll need more energy for our invention and the energy on the planet is limited. Exactly. Yeah. Right. And I'm all for like a of bringing us to like a Kardashev scale civilization of using the full power of our sun, to as an energy source and things like that. But what I always tell people is that I don't think we'll ever get to be a spacefaring habitat with capitalism, right? This is why I really hate things like colonizing space, right? Using the same words of colonizing another place, right? To describe us going to space, or I don't like shows like what do you call it? That show, it has like a couple of seasons. I think it's on Amazon now, where they are mining across. They have this war with Mars and Earth, and they're mining the asteroids and stuff like that. Starts with E. I don't know why I forget this dang show. It's super popular, but I don't like that show because it's basically space capitalism, and it doesn't really make sense because you can see this very problem now is that even with Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk sending satellites to space, the fact is that you will never be able to send enough people to space to develop those sorts of colonies, right? Because of things like the space debris, all the trash that's in orbit is a huge problem, right? We can't even send more than a couple spaceships at a time because of all the trash that's in space, right? Because with capitalism, you don't really care about efficiency. You just throw it up there and then just leave it, right? Or all the other satellites that people put up there at that time, they just throw it up there and leave it. They don't really care about the environment or bringing it back down or all this other stuff. And then on top of that, you have how much, of course, pollutive chemicals gets released with any of these chemical-based rockets, that destroys the atmosphere and adds more pollution to the problem. So by the time we even have the abilities to build a base on the moon, most of the earth will be experiencing so much climate change that people won't be able to focus on spacefaring projects anymore, right? You see that today. Once again, people are saying, oh, why are you spending all this money on space when we have all these problems on earth, right? Are saying this. Even though I disagree, I think we should go to space because it will help us more on earth. But the truth is that we're spending so much, like we have so many problems on earth, that a lot of them would get out of hand before we have a chance to go to space, right? um and that's very concerning. So yeah, like this idea of just being able to invent our way to I don't know, what do you call it, like perfection or utopia or whatever, is inherently wrong and problematic. And I say that as a techno wizard. My whole thing is trying to invent magic that is indistinguishable. I mean, invent technology that is indistinguishable from magic. Like I love the idea of creating all these different types of technologies, but the reality is that we have to think about this a lot more. We can't create it, put it out there, iterate on it, and hope it works. No, we have to sit down and really see how it will affect their environment, how it will affect the people's mentalities as they utilize different types of technologies, how it will affect our society at large, the all that stuff. So there's so much that we need to figure out here. Let's continue. Um, the doctrine of intellectual property prevents the spread of useful technologies. Oh my gosh, 100%. Another shot, allowing them to be controlled or withheld according to what is most profitable. Apologists for capitalism typically argue that intellectual property encourages the development of technology because it gives people the assurance as incentive that they can profit from their invention, which is completely wrong. I'm sure they'll break it down. What kind of cretin would invent something socially useful if he wouldn't get exclusive credit for it and profit from it? Exactly, right? It encourages the worst kind of behavior in terms of inventions. But the technological mainstays of our world were developed by groups of people who let their inventions spread freely and didn't take credit for them. Exactly. everything from the hammer to stringed musical instruments to domesticated grains. And the internet, once again, a huge part of the internet is built because of thanks to open source projects, right? A huge part, Android, Linux, most the best of our operating systems is thanks to freaking open source projects, right? Centric says, and the second law of thermodynamics, nothing is free. Oh, right. Yeah, right. Everything kind of costs energy and things like that. And that is kind of funny that we have this. There's this idea of in capitalism, right? In our current system that says, oh, people shouldn't build things for free, right? They should get paid for it. And yet when it comes to technological growth or business growth or things like that, we just say, oh, it could just keep going, right, forever. That's basically getting free energy, right? Because how is it growing? Like what energy are we putting into it to grow? We say we're putting money into it. Well, where does that money come from, right? What resources are we exploiting to grow this stuff? Everything that grows requires energy, right? So if technology and business is growing, you have to ask what energy is putting in, what energy are we shoveling in to make that exponential growth happen, right? If we can't point to a thing that says, okay, this is the energy source, then we have to really be worried because that means we're gonna bite the bill. That bill's gonna come back and we're not gonna be able to pay it. And that's what we're seeing today. Hmm. It's quite unfortunate. But yeah, this point right here, man. And it isn't like he went into it, but from my own research, there's actually not much or maybe even any evidence that says that IP, intellectual property, creates more innovation. There's no evidence about this, right? When you look it up, you begin to see the fact that most IP, right, most patents and all this other stuff is created and or supported by big businesses. Meaning the vast majority of things that get patented are things that are from people or organizations that were already wealthy, right? They already had a whole bunch of resources and things available. They already was making bank, right? IP does not support the little guy. If you go and try to patent something, guess what? You have to pay a huge amount of money to even patent pend it, and somebody else, right? Some huge organization always has patent lawyers. They who go through new patents that's being filed, and if they find something promising, they can buy it out. They can come in. They can, well, I say buy it out, but really they're not buying it from you, right? They don't really care about you. They would like buy it out by finding people who can copy this thing, right? Who can copy it, or change just a little bit, or even say, oh, they did, or even claim that they developed something first, and throw you in court, and you're trying to prove that you patented it first, instead. And even if you win that thing, or if you have a chance of winning, you'll be in court for so long that you'll go bankrupt just trying to keep your thing out, right? And by the time, even if you win, right, even if you find a lawyer who does this pro bono and all this other stuff, you still be in the um there for years, right? Over upwards of a decade. By the time you get out, your innovation doesn't even matter anymore. Right? So a lot of the times, IP and patenting doesn't really benefit the vast majority of people. It's just a tool for bigger corporations to maintain their power, right? And this to be true. Like you can go and try to patent something yourself. See how easy it is, right? It's not. Even people who claim, oh, have 100 patents, right? Have a whole bunch of patents. Ask them, what benefits are they getting from those patents, right? Who patented things on their behalf? Because the vast majority of people who have a whole bunch of patents did so under a large company, under Apple, Instagram, things like that, right? So yeah, in practice, the capitalist economy itself disproves the assumptions about intellectual property fomenting innovation. Just like any other kind of property, intellectual property usually does not belong to those who produce it. Many inventions are made by wage slaves in laboratories who get no credit and no profit because their contracts stipulate that the corporation they work for receives ownership of the patents. Right? Ain't that the thing? Capitalism claims, oh yeah, right. It's about the individuals, and you can have the ability to own the capital or means of production, things like that. But if you work for another corporation, it doesn't matter how much effort you put in there. Ooh, excuse me. Um, they can lay claim to your stuff. And how many times have we seen where so many people invent something and they try to, um, maybe they were at the job or they were, even outside the job, and that job made it really hard for them to do anything with it. They gave them a hard time and stuff like that. So it's it's a mess. The best people to develop useful innovations are the ones who need them, and they do not need government or capitalism to help them do this. Anarchists themselves have a rich history of inventing solutions to the problems they face. The anarchist bank robbers known as the Bonat Gang, ooh, interesting, invented the getaway car. Wow. that's that's hilarious. Makhno, the Ukrainian anarchist, was the first to deploy highly mobile machine guns. Oof. He mounted them on techchonkies, the horse-drawn carts used by the peasantry, with devastating effect against superior foes bogged down in traditional tactics. In revolutionary Spain, after they had expropriated the big landlords, collectivized the land, and freed themselves from the need to produce a single export crop, farmers improved the health of the soil and increased their self-sufficiency by intercropping, specifically growing shade-tolerant crops beneath the orange trees. The Peasant Federation of the Levant in Spain set up an agricultural university, and other agricultural collectives founded a center for the study of plant diseases and tree culture. Yeah, that's another huge problem with agriculture is that today a lot of mass agriculture is a bunch of monocultural things, right? There's one type of plant in a huge area, and it really destroys the soil. Those plants eventually become less efficient and less nutritious themselves, and then you're kind of shit out of luck, and it also um, handicaps the economy around that area too. In the highlands of New Guinea, millions of farmers live at high population densities in steep mountain valleys. Their communities are stateless, consensus based, and, until relatively recently, completely uncontacted by the West. Interesting. Though they appeared as Stone Age primitives to racist Europeans, they have developed one of the most complex agricultural systems in the world. Mm. Whew, gotta stay hydrated. Their techniques are so precise and numerous that they take years to learn. Self important Western scientists still do not know the reasons for many of these techniques, which they might dismiss as superstition were they not proven to work. Hmm, interesting. For the last 7,000 years, the Highlanders have practiced a dynamic form of sustainable agriculture in response to impacts on their environment that might have caused less innovative societies to collapse. Their methods include complex forms of irrigation, soil retention, intercropping, and more. The Highlanders have no chiefs and make their decisions in long community discussions. They have developed all their techniques without government or capitalism via individual and group innovations communicated freely, large decentralized society. And that's another thing, right? Once again, because when societies kind of take their time to develop a new technology, they can do so more consciously, right? And more with more awareness of the effects and what it takes to accomplish that. Many of these societies that quickly came up with new inventions and everything like that, from ancient Egypt all the way up to America today, fell, right? Greek, Rome, a lot of Mesopotamians, a lot of folks in China, all these empires, the Aztecs, you know, they fell, right? They collapsed under the weight of their own technological progress and other progress and their expansionism, right? And that's one of the key problems of technology, of technological progress, is that it can be myopic. You can you can innovate your way to your own extinction. We see that once again today with our technology, with our nuclear weapons and all this other stuff. We create this amazing stuff that can completely destroy the world. And now we are a minute or 2 minutes to midnight or whatever. So anytime, if we all kind of are struggling with this idea that if we ever break out into another world war, that's probably it. That's probably it for us, right? And that is that is one of the most critical problems of going too fast with technological progress, is that we're not smart enough, we're not wise enough to use this stuff responsibly. If you look at, many of this, the innovation of like these anarchic societies, these folks, I've talked about the Khoisan people a lot who lived in the Kalahari Desert for almost over 100,000 years, almost 200,000 years, coming down from the birthplace of the cradle of humanity. They somehow were able to figure out how to live in that area in one of the most, what they call a wasteland in Africa, right? With deserted, like it's super dry land. It's not exactly desert. Um, it's like it's an arid wasteland, literally. Right? They somehow figured out how to survive there for thousands of years, right? Um, and they have extremely innovative methods of doing that, right? Methods of foraging, resources. So even in a drought, they can still survive, using little poisoned arrows that, um, that are able to kill their prey and stuff like that without expending too much energy, using these little bows and arrows that are collapsible or easy to move around and things like that. These innovations, and probably a whole bunch of others that we don't even know of, um, that that we kind of scoff at and say, oh, it's not really a thing, right? But it actually is a thing, because it's worked for them for hundreds of thousands of years. And any of our technologies today become what, useless in the next 10 years, in the next 20 years, right? Like, look at the time horizon between these different things. This is why people say all the time, oh, books are better than, digital format. Now personally, I like digital format because it's easier for me, but the fact is, it's true. Like, what happens to, these digital formats in 10 years? We'll be able to read these formats and things like that. What about 50 years? Right? Will we have different video formats and text formats and all this other stuff that renders almost everything we have today useless? Like, look at videotapes, like VCRs and stuff like that from the last decade. We thought it was amazing that we could do this, and now today nobody has a VCR. So all that stuff that was in the VCR is almost useless. We have to figure out how to translate it into the new, method. What if instead, we took time to figure out how to develop technologies that lasted hundreds of years, thousands of years? What would that look like? Right? How can we create a computer that stores knowledge like a mountain, right? So that even any data that you store today would be readable in 10,000 years, right? How can we create something like that? Most of us don't even think about this, right? But that's the problem. We're very myopic with a lot of our technology, and it makes us arrogant. It makes us say, "Oh, yeah, we've made all this progress and stuff like that." But then if we all crumble to dust because under the weight of our own technology, what's the point? So yeah. Anyways, um, decentralized society. Many Westerners might scoff at the thought of the people who do not use metal tools could provide a model of technological sophistication. These cynics, however, are simply benighted by Euro American mythology and superstitions. Technology is not blinking lights and wearing gadgets. Exactly. I hate people. I hate when people say, "Oh, that's not technology. This is technology." Like, technology is not computers, right? Technology is fire. Technology is clothing. Technology is language. Like, literally anything that makes, our lives better. That's the definition of technology, if you will, the application of science. So it doesn't matter what form it's in. What matters is if it actually does make our lives better, um, and what we learn from it. Anyways, technology's adaptation. Yep. By adapting a complex set of techniques that have allowed them to meet all their needs without destroying their environment over 7,000 years, the New Guinea farmers have accomplished something Western civilization has never even approached. How many societies that we know lasted 7,000 years? How many Western, empires, if you will, lasted 7,000 years? The longest empire we know of is probably ancient Egypt, right? The last a couple thousand years. I think that was what, 5,000 or something like that. And even them, they went back and forth, right? They constantly fought with Nubia, who was a little bit more decentralized. So they had, that helping them, and they were at the kind of the middle point of all these other civilizations who kind of conquered them and kind of kept them propped up a little bit. But all these empires that we love to praise did not last. So again, what's the point? Um, Anyways, still, there are plenty of anarchistic examples of the impressed by blinking lights crowd. Consider the recent proliferation of open source technology. Exactly. I just talked about that, right? Decentralized networks involving thousands of people working openly, voluntarily, and cooperatively have created some of the better forms of the complicated software in which the information age economy depends. The usual approach of major corporations is to keep the source or code for their software secret and patent it. But open source software code is shared so anyone can review it and improve it. As a result, it is often much better and generally easier to fix. And unfortunately, it has been very much destroyed today because open source technology. There's this um, strategy of these corporate organizations to kind of sabotage these open source projects, right? Go in there, steal some of the things and then patent it, things like that. Um, it's really sad. Traditional patented software is more vulnerable to crashing into viruses because a smaller pool of brains are able to check for weaknesses, and very few specialists are available to fix the problems. Exactly. Those technical support people you call on the phone when your computer operating system crashes don't get to see the code either. And beyond a little troubleshooting, all they can do is direct you to a cumbersome patch. Yeah. Oh, yeah, or advise you to erase your hard drive and reinstall the operating system. Users of Microsoft products, for example, are no doubt familiar with their freaking glitches. Oh yeah, Windows 11 already has a lot. And privacy advocates also warn of spyware and the cooperation between technology corporations and the government. Says one anti-authoritarian geek involved in the creation of open source software, the best advertisement for Linux is Microsoft. Yeah, I still have yet to use Linux because unfortunately they make it really hard to do so, right? You can't even, it's really difficult to dual boot, software to get hardware that comes separate from Microsoft, that comes separate from Apple or something like that. It's really difficult to get hardware to just cold boot, Linux or something like that. So that's a tactic they use, right? Because if you want to destroy open source software, make it harder for people to access open source software, right? People love to say, "Oh, open source software is more, has bad UX or is more complicated or organized." But if you've ever looked at, the open source community and all the different distributions they have, all the different distros, it's amazing. A lot of them are pretty similar. Like I've used, I think it was Cinnamon before. I used Mint a little bit in my last computer, and it's functional. Like it works almost just like how you would expect, right? It's not like some difficult thing and all the other stuff. It's fairly easy and simple, but it's hard to access because they make it hard to access because these corporations don't want to make it easy for you to put your own free operating system on there. how oh my gosh, let me finish this. Traditionally, most open source software has not been especially user friendly, though generally this has to do with the fact that open source resides within, with all due respect, a geek subculture. Exactly. And its typical users are highly computer literate. Exactly. Oh my gosh. I pointed this out so many times because I've been in the open metaverse interoperability group and several other metaverse groups. And folks were discussing, oh, well, maybe we shouldn't do open source stuff because open source tends to be not user friendly. But I'm like, first of all, most of you aren't even designers; you're developers, and so you're claiming that it's not user friendly, but the developers are the exact type of people who make it not user friendly because they don't understand design. Right, just like me as a designer trying to code, if I try to code something and I don't really understand how to do good code, it's not going to function well, right? I can't go and say, oh, this stuff is bad, this stuff doesn't it's not efficient as a code, whatever, just because I don't understand the code. And that's the same for a lot of open source software. Unfortunately, a lot of open source software um, is made by people who can code. And that's another part of the problem too, right? Is in order to make your own software, you have to learn how to code, right? It's very hard for a person who's non-technical or at least who is um yeah, both non-technical and like non-coding, like not a developer, to create their own software, to create their own solutions today because the tools available are very much biased towards a specific subgroup of people. And this subgroup of people, developers, are typically not designers. They typically don't understand how to create a user-friendly software. Some people claim they are, right? Some people say, "Oh, I'm a designer developer. I can go back and forth. I understand design." But then they go around and make, not user-friendly designs. So yeah, it's a mess. Essentially says evolution uses chance and necessity, but uses natural selection to correct its errors. Yeah, and that's another part of this, right? People like to assume that evolution means that we're going from bad to good, or from better, or from worse to better, or something like that, right? From weak to strong. But that's not what evolution is about. Evolution is just about surviving, and whatever allows you to survive, and that method. A chicken is more evolved than a dinosaur today. Right? It's not that doesn't mean the chicken is better. It's just more suited for its current environment, right? Over the last couple of 100,000 years. So a human, the fact that we've taken over the planet, we like to mistake ourselves as more evolved. All right, people will make this mistake all the time. They say, "Oh, maybe monkeys in 1,000 years or in 10,000 years would evolve to where we are now," but that's not how it works. It's not a straight line, right? We're just one node on this tree of evolution. Technically, the monkeys that are alive today are just as evolved as we are. The only difference is that we're like an invasive species that's taken over the entire environment and destroying everything because of it. And so, if we don't correct ourselves and drive ourselves to extinction, right, that will be the end of our evolution. That will be the result of our evolution, if you will. So yeah, definitely a lot of evolution doesn't really care about doing things better per se. Efficiency is usually a good indicator of if something will evolve, but not always, right? It's more about if it's, as long as it's not harmful to your survival. um, so yeah, definitely great point, eccentric. um, Traditionally, much open source software has not been especially user friendly. Oh yeah, okay. However, open source and participatory technology are steadily becoming accessible to an extent unprecedented by appropriate proprietary software. Wikipedia exemplifies this. Oh, that's another great point. Wikipedia started recently in 2001 on open source Linux software recently. This, how old is this book? um, Wikipedia is already the largest and most accessed encyclopedia in the world, with over 10 million articles in more than 250 languages. Rather than being the exclusive domain of paid experts from a particular academic subculture, Wikipedia is written by everyone. And ain't that the thing, right? Because people like to poo-poo Wikipedia all the time. Oh, anybody can update it, but no, not anybody can. You have to actually be allowed in that group. You have to be like one of these people who are vetted to have this good information, and other people can correct and say, "Oh, you don't have the right sources," right? Just like with anything, if you want to make sure something is good on Wikipedia or any other source of knowledge, look for the sources. Look where they got it, right? And Wikipedia is better than pretty much any other place online, right? Both because of these sources and because it's free, right? Most sources like freaking JSTOR, which has all these scientific articles, is paywalled, right? You can't really access all that knowledge on there because you have to belong to an institution who would then pay, to get access to this. So most people can't even get access to all that knowledge and thing like that. These scientific journals are the same thing. They're paywalled, so you can't even access the knowledge. So, like, it's self-defeating. Let's continue. Anyone can author an article or edit an existing article, and by allowing this openness and trust, it provides a forum for instantaneous multiple peer review, right? And that's the thing too, because anybody can edit. Um, However, again, it's not necessarily anybody. You do have to be vetted, and the people, like, there's some vetting in there, which is important. But the fact that a lot of people, right, many, it's relatively easy to edit things. That means it's inherently peer reviewed, right? We claim that science is about peer review, but a lot of the science that we have today is extremely hard for anybody to peer review. You have to also be in the circle, right? The circle of science is part of an institution or something like that. Have access to to the journal or to the scientific pool of knowledge, right? You have to have access to that in order for you to peer review it, right? So it's not. It's really hard to get things that have a high level of peer review, like you would with Wikipedia. So that's another great point there. The interests of the broader Wikipedia community of millions provide a self-regulating function. So vandalism, false editing, bogus articles are quickly cleaned up. Exactly. All right. And facts lacking citations are challenged. Yep. Wikipedia articles avail themselves of a vastly greater body of knowledge than a small and generally elitist circle represented by academia. Exactly. In a blind, peer-reviewed study is judged to be as accurate as Encyclopedia Britannica. Interesting. Nice. I've never even used Encyclopedia Britannica. So that's interesting to note right there. Um, and now we have things like Stack Overflow and Core and stuff like that that take this idea and put it in different functions as well. So it's a good model. Wikipedia is self organizing and edited by an open body of peer elected administrators. There have been a few publicized cases of intentional sabotage, such as when the televised news comedy show The Colbert Report rewrote history in one Wikipedia article as a gag for their show, but the prank was quickly fixed, as most false information on the site tends to be. A more lingering problem is posed by corporations who use Wikipedia for public relations purposes. Oh, yeah. Tasking paid personnel to maintain a clean image in the articles about them. However, contradicting interpretations of the facts can be registered in the same article, and Wikipedia contains much more information on corporate misdeeds than any traditional encyclopedia. Exactly. Right. And that's beautiful. I wish they would have went more into depth about all this stuff because there's so much more you can get into. Um, like hardware, how we make hardware and where it comes from. The fact that a lot of hardware, once again, depends on exploited labor and resources and polluting of different people's stuff, like with clothing and things like that. That's another huge point. A lot of the clothing that we have today, like jeans and dyed clothes, like anything with a whole bunch of colors, is extremely toxic, right? Like terribly toxic. It poisons the rivers, the land, the air, everything. So many places in India or China or other places in Asia and Africa, South America have poisoned land, air, water because of our clothes, because of these other materials and things like that that we use in our technologies, in our modern day technologies. And then on top of that, the waste, right? Right. So once something gets developed, like this, once again, going back to these clothes, we have this fast fashion, right, that people can use to develop these clothing. And then when it gets um sold, or rather when it doesn't get sold, it just sits in a warehouse. And because when the season is over, right, when nobody wants to buy winter holiday outfits and they want to change it to spring or to summer, what do they do with all that? They throw it away. All this is why they do site wide sales. They don't care about the fact that they're making it cheaper. What they care about the fact is that they need to get rid of it, right? Because otherwise it just sits in their store taking up space that they need for new stuff, right? So what happens to all that stuff? It gets thrown in the waste pile. And a huge, and we I see this all the time. Walking, going, not walking, but driving down the highway, you see these huge piles of just trash. Just think about that. We have huge piles of trash, and we try to put huge, grass over it, but it stinks, you know, and it poisons the land. And these landfills aren't even the biggest ones. Most of it gets shipped off to like so-called recycling plants to in China and things like that. But they don't want a lot of it. Like they don't actually recycle most of the quote unquote recyclable plastics and clothes and all this other stuff that we send across the seas. And so instead, they send it to South America and it gets dumped on a beach somewhere. On a beach, there's an entire beach out there with just clothes and trash. And of course, that goes right into the ocean, right? So all the foods, all the fishies and the corals and all that other stuff, the coral reefs get destroyed, polluted by all of our trash, all of our technology, right? So there's so much that goes into this, into what to making good technology and to making innovation happen. It doesn't just happen. And one of the reasons why I call myself a techno wizard is because one of my dreams is to develop technology that feels like magic, like a magical experience, right? And that means for me, it doesn't just mean the user experience. It doesn't just mean, oh, I click this and it's intuitive. It means the entire process of getting the resources is like magic, meaning you know where it's coming from, right? When you perform a magical spell, you have to have the resources in front of you, right? You have to have the resources available. You have to have the means to do it. You can't just say, "Hey, you do magic for me," and oh, now I've done magic. No, if you want to do magic, you have to do magic. You have to have the resources right here. You have to know what goes into every spell, right? And then you have to boom cast it together. You have to see, understand how it flows, how it you know forms together to form the product that you're trying to create. And once you're done with it, right? You take the resources back because it's useful. You say, okay, if it's not a one use spell and it doesn't use the resources up completely, you take the extra back and you keep it. Right. That's what people don't really think about in terms of magic. It's extremely efficient, right? And that's what I want our technology to be. I want it to be like I see some dirt on the ground and I can, use some magnetic field or something to create, a object with it or something like that. And then when I'm done with it, I could, uncreate and put the dirt back. All right. um, and this is it seems mystical and crazy and kind of like unrealistic, but I think that's where we need to go if we want our technology to be environmentally friendly, sustainable, useful, um, non-exploitive, and all this other stuff. Right? We have to create technology that feels more magical, and that doesn't mean just comes out of thin air and we just don't think about it. No, the best magic systems are things that you think about, are things that you figure out how it works, why it works, all this other stuff. And that's one of my dreams for technology. So yeah, there's so much more I can probably say about this topic, but I'll try to put more of it in my newsletter and you know make a separate video about it and stuff like that, because I have this whole thing of breaking down different types of magic systems and different types of magic, and then comparing that to technology. Right, I did this in a podcast. I'll probably put a link there just to play around with this idea as well. Like for druids versus warlocks versus witches, wizards, chronomancers, like all these different types of technologies. I kind of broke down how it might work and how we could create a technological equivalent to that type of magic system. So yeah, that's something I really nerd out about. um, and it's something I've thought about more than I've actually talked about. Right. So in my mind, it's there, but I haven't really coalesced it much as I want to. So I want to do more of that. But anyways, we're almost an hour now. So next time we'll get into how will exchange work. I guess just like trade and stuff like that. I'm very excited for that as well. This chapter has been absolutely amazing, and we're only on chapter 3, and there's so much more to go. I need to speed this up because there's a lot of other books I want to read on here. But as always, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Thanks for commenting, eccentric, and anybody else that comments in the future. Please feel free to put your thoughts in there. If you think I'm wrong, even I'll be willing to talk with you and see, come up with actually have a discussion. Why am I wrong? Don't just say, "Oh, I'm stupid." Oh, you didn't. Blah, blah, blah. No, like come up with a real, real argument. We could go back and forth about this because I got the receipts. I'm ready for you. Um, but yeah, thanks as always, and keep learning. Keeping your eyes open and learn about the world and how the world works, and not some arrogant idea of how you think the world works. No, just keep asking why. Why do we do this? Why do we do it? Why do we do it that way? Keep asking why until you can't figure out anymore, and then ask other people. All right, come ask me. Come learn. We can learn together. And the more we learn about how the world works and why the world works and how much more we need to learn about how to make it work better, and the more we can make it work better. We have to actually open ourselves to this in order to do more. So yeah, thanks as always, and have a great day. See ya. Bye bye.